The Red House, the home of Trinidad and Tobago's legislative body and parliament. It's been standing here for 100 glorious but turbulent years. It's been shot at and gutted by fire. So it was rebuilt, and oh, it hasn't always been red. There's quite a lot of history within and around these walls, so join us on this journey into its past. For our purposes, we'll start in 1808. That's when most of Port of Spain was destroyed by fire. The fact that most of the buildings were made of wood and shingle contributed to the destructive force of the flames. As a result, new legislation was passed. From now on, all government buildings were to be constructed with brick. It was a well-intentioned law, but good intentions aren't always enough. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After the British arrived in Trinidad, one of the first steps they made towards establishing a more representative form of governance was the establishment of a Council of Advice, made up of 5 local landowners selected by the governor. Of course, local planters, being mostly of Spanish and French origin, weren't happy with this arrangement, since none of them were ever selected to the council. So for many years, they petitioned the governor for a truly representative form of government. Finally, in 1831, the Legislative Council was established. The members were local big shots, if you will. Any decisions made by this body had to be approved by the governor and the colonial office, but could be vetoed by the British government. With the formation of this Legislative Council, it became apparent that a building was needed to house the members for their meetings and for official documents. So, on the 15th of February 1844, Governor Sir Henry MacLeod laid the foundation stone for a new block of government buildings to be positioned on the west of Brunswick Square. We know Brunswick Square as the University of Woodford Square. The architect of the building was Richard Bridgens, the Superintendent of Public Works, trained in British classicism. Bridgens designed 2 buildings, but these designs weren't particularly well received. Just 2 basic colonial buildings to occupy 2 blocks north and south of Prince Street. Each building had a 15-bay facade. The building's entrances were on the north and south facades and were joined by a double archway. The archway was designed to appease the city council. They said Prince Street must remain open to all traffic, pedestrian and otherwise. The southern wing, which contained the law courts, was opened in 1848. 4 years after the foundation stone was laid. 1 month later, Lord Harris formally inaugurated the council chamber with a service at the Trinity Cathedral. We aren't sure what the building's interiors looked like. They must have had a chamber to house the courtroom or legislature, and of course, administrative offices, but the actual layout is unknown. Not much happened to the building after that. Construction stalled until an article appeared in the Port of Spain Gazette in 1892. In it, the author complained that the building had been abandoned for 50 years. He said the building's design was bland and unimpressive. It was apparent that work was not complete because the structure was becoming synonymous with a promise unfulfilled. Perhaps someone may have taken the article to heart, or maybe the need for proper record-keeping facilities was overwhelming because work on the building was renewed. J. E. Tanner, the then Director of Public Works, presented plans for 2 new buildings, and work was started on them in 1895. His plans were quite ambitious. Additions, 2 stories tall, would be erected on the southern corner of the northern building. A similar structure would also be erected on the northern end of the southern building.
Originally it was 2 buildings with a throughway which is connected what is now Sackville Street and used to be called Prince Street, connected Sackville to St. Vincent Street and to Brunswick Square, which is now Woodford Square. So people were able to walk through the building, in between the 2 buildings, through archways, from one side to the next.
Both additions would be joined to create an interior courtyard. The new structures would house the registrar's office and the record office. Cost of the project, £15,000. The new construction completely changed the character of the building. Instead of two buildings, it was finally one structure. 1897 was Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. The buildings were painted red in her honor, and the people promptly christened the building the Red House. The newer building material probably contrasted with the older work. A fresh coat of paint was applied to complete the look. It made the old look new and the new look just right. Unfortunately, in spite of all the hard work, this Red House only lasted 6 years. On the 23rd of March 1903, the new ordinance regarding water rates in the capital was being debated in the Legislative Council. At the same time, the Ratepayers Association was staging a protest meeting in Brunswick Square. As expected, the public was not pleased with this new ordinance, since some of its clauses would force a rate increase.
Honorable people, ladies and gentlemen, please listen, listen. I just walked out of the Legislative Council chamber. They are insisting that only ticket holders will be allowed inside the public gallery, and they are not accepting a proposal to move an adjournment of the House. I, for one, am not staying in any chamber if the people of this country have to get tickets to see their representatives at work.
When the meeting in Brunswick Square concluded, the angry crowd converged on the Red House, throwing stones and other objects. They destroyed all the windows, including a stained glass designed to commemorate the arrival of Christopher Columbus to Trinidad and Tobago. But it was when police arrested a woman in the crowd that the violence turned ugly. The crowd threw so many stones and other missiles into the council chamber that members had to hide under tables, chairs, and behind pillars to avoid being struck. Governor Maloney refused to budge, insisting that the ordinance remain. An enraged crowd set the lower story of the Red House on fire, forcing the police to read the Riot Act, essentially giving them permission to quell the crowd by any means necessary. When the dust cleared, 16 people were dead and 42 were injured. The Red House was completely destroyed by fire. Only a burnt-out shell remained. But from a closer look at the damage, it seems that all was not lost. As this picture of the Red House clearly shows, the building's exterior survived, and even this picture shows a building that is remarkably similar to its modern incarnation. It appears that some of the original structure was retained in the rebuilding process. Work on rebuilding the Red House began quickly. 1 year after the water riots of 1903 destroyed the Red House, construction started. D.M. Hahn, chief draftsman of Public Works, designed and commissioned the new building. The work would cost £7,485. The cost included the gesso work in the Legislative Council chamber. Gesso is a mixture of plaster of Paris that is prepared with glue. The gesso work alone cost £7,200. The chamber ceiling was painted Wedgwood blue and accented with white gesso work, quite a striking combination. An English firm, Messrs. Jackson & Sons, was hired to do the work on the ceiling. The decorations, made in England and shipped to Trinidad in crates. An Italian craftsman brought in to install the ceiling. Hahn also designed the dais and entablature at the building's eastern end. The columns and the entablature were made of purple heart wood. The paneling was rustic.
The style of the building is what we call classical revival or neoclassical architecture. Classical architecture has always been associated with strength, with permanence, with dominance. And you find that in a lot of countries that were colonized, the colonizing country generally built that type of building to indicate that They were the superpower.
A single passageway was created to replace the double archway. This meant that vehicular traffic could no longer pass through the Red House, but pedestrians were free to pass through as they pleased from Abercrombie to St. Vincent Street and back. A fountain was placed in the center of the rotunda. Not simply for decorative purposes, it helped cool the offices, making life more bearable in the tropical heat.
The Red House is designed as a tropical building. You must remember it's now air conditioned, but that when it was built, there wasn't any air conditioning. So the building is very, very good where airflow is concerned. Air comes in through the gates. It's cooled in the rotunda because the fountain is there, and then it goes up. The hot air rises and goes up through the clerestory windows. Even the wings of the building, you have an external corridor where these big doors open onto the corridor so that the air can pass from one side of the building straight through to the next. This has always been the case. The building is properly designed for the tropics.
But it was only during this construction that the most important feature of the Parliament was added. A public gallery was designed and included in the new building. So now people were officially invited to come and observe their government and representatives in action. Finally, some 3 years after work commenced, the Red House as we know it was completed. On February 4th, 1907, Governor Jackson opened the Red House to the public. The rubble of the original Red House was removed and used as landfill for Victoria and Harris Squares. During World War I, Brunswick Square was given its current name, Woodford Square, and modern Port of Spain took shape. Over the years, several government departments made their home in the Red House. The Attorney General, the Registrar General, Lands and Surveys Department, Judges' Chambers, the Courts of Justice, the Law Libraries, the Parliament and the Legislative Council, the antecedent to our modern-day Parliament, were all located in the Red House. Eventually, as the country matured, gaining independence and becoming a republic, many departments moved out of the Red House.
When I became a member of Parliament in 1971, the courts were in the Red House. So that even though by that time we were independent and there was the separation of powers, the courts were in the Red House and the Legislative Council had now become the Parliament because we were an independent state. All were coexisting together with some of the government departments in the Red House.
Today, the Red House continues to host the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago in its North Wing and Rotunda.
When we look at the Parliament represents really three things. It's a structure that is on a tripod, and that tripod is representation, it is dialogue, and it is accountability.
Like a phoenix, the Red House rose from the ashes to be reborn together with the hopes and aspirations of a young but strong democracy. Then, 1990. July 27th, 1990. It was Friday, so Parliament was in session. Then, just after 6 in the evening, gunmen stormed the Parliament. They entered the chamber, taking then Prime Minister A.N.R. Robinson, 8 of his cabinet ministers and 6 other members of Parliament hostage.
On that fateful day, the 27th of July 1990, when the Parliament broke for tea, there was a delay in the Parliament coming back. By 5:10, it had not yet been recalled, and I left the Parliament at that stage. And my office, of course, I was leader of the opposition, and my office was not far away, just on Frederick Street. And normally on a Friday evening, I would clear my desk, so I went back to do that. And while I was there, I heard this almighty explosion, and then the next thing I heard bullets, and I saw people running on Knox Street, and from Frederick Street to Knox Street and vice versa.
The Red House was shot at and even shelled during the 6-day coup. Bullet holes were found in the walls, doors, and windows of the building, and even in the ceiling. A gaping hole was discovered on the ground floor in the southern end of the building. 7 people were killed. Roger George, Assistant Superintendent. Lorraine Caballero, Clerical Officer. Malcolm Basanta, Estate Policeman. Mervyn Teague, Government Broadcasting Unit Employee. Arthur Giuseppe, ex-policeman. George Francis, chauffeur. Simon MacLeod, police headquarters sentry. The representative for Digger Martin Central, Member of Parliament Leo Devines, was injured in the attack. He later died of his wounds at hospital. His portrait now hangs in the Parliament chamber. For weeks, the Red House stood as the symbol for our shattered democracy. The coup shook the easygoing attitude of Trinbagonians, and for a time, the injured building reflected the nation's brokenness, shock, and pessimism. But then, it was time for healing. The restoration of the Red House began. The project was set out in 3 phases. The first focused on the southern end of the Red House. At the time of the coup, the upper southern wing of the Red House was vacant. Phase 2 saw the repainting and refurbishing of the outside of the building and the northern chamber. The third and final phase, which includes a complete restoration of the entire building, is underway. During the repair and renovation, the pedestrian path through the building was finally closed. Sittings of both the Senate and the House of Representatives were hosted in the Central Bank Auditorium for some 3 months while the Southern Chamber was being restored. Sittings returned to the Red House by the 5th of November 1990, just in time for the opening of the 5th session of the 3rd Republican Parliament, and after 1 year resumed in the original Northern Chamber. The session opened with a rededication of the chamber and a memorial service. A plaque with the names of all those who died was unveiled. The eternal flame was lit to commemorate their lives. It remains lit to remind us of the need to be ever vigilant in the protection of our democracy. The flame stands atop the marble cenotaph on the eastern lawn. The oath of allegiance of members of Parliament, the national anthem, the affirmation of the people, and the names of those we lost to the coup are all inscribed on the cenotaph. When the People's National Movement was re-elected in 1992, then Prime Minister Patrick Manning decided to replace the dragon or sea serpent on top the building with a dove. At the time, it was a controversial move. The dove, made of copper and painted white, weighed 20 pounds. The Ken Morris design was put in place the night of January 11, 1992, just in time for the ceremonial opening of the parliamentary session. It stands atop the Red House as a symbol of the strength of our democracy, grounded in the heart of our nation and built with its sweat and tears. Its position adjacent to the University of Woodford Square means the Red House is uniquely positioned to allow direct communication between the people and its government.
Woodford Square was always there, and there was a relationship between Woodford Square and the Red House. Woodford Square developed into the People's Parliament, reflecting in a sense the fact that the Legislative Council was in the Red House and nearby, so that relationship always existed between the Red House and Woodford Square and the people.
By surviving the coup, the Red House stands as a symbol of the strength of our democracy.
If we are to think of that Parliament located elsewhere, I believe we would have lost some of that the strength that we have in a building that represents from the very beginning the birth of nationhood for Trinidad and Tobago.
After undergoing several cycles of construction, destruction, and reconstruction, the Red House you see today is truly reflective of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It was transformed from 2 classical British buildings to one that reflects the cosmopolitan character of the country. Quite a lot has changed in 100 years. Imagine what would happen to it over the next 100. Thank you for joining me on this little journey into its past. Our past.